in the lecture notes for Chapter 13, Surface Water, Section 4, that deals with floodplains and floods. The idea in Section 4 is that river floods are naturally occurring events that sometimes threaten human populations. The learning objectives in this section: number 1, will describe the features of a floodplain. Number 2, explain why floods occur. And finally, summarize natural and artificial methods of flood prevention and control. The features of a floodplain. The floodplain of a river is the valley that is covered with water when the river overflows its banks. As the river approaches the base level, its gradient and velocity decrease. The river current is more easily deflected sideward, and its course becomes winding. The banks and the valley walls are slowly eroded by the river, and valley floor widens into a floodplain. And you saw this in the last lecture when we were talking about V-shaped valleys. Young rivers, eventually they will widen to become floodplains. And this is an example of a floodplain. You can see that the remnant V-shape here on the sides, but as this river got older, it flooded out into this area around the river. This is another example of a floodplain, graphic of a floodplain. This would be a fairly young river in that you noticed all the twists and turns here. And what typically happens with a younger river, this would be an example of stream piracy or cutoff, and it forms these oxbow lakes. These lakes will typically go away because they aren't receiving their water from the groundwater, and you can see that they're cut off from the main source. So a lot of these lakes will eventually dry up. And as I said before, this is indicative of a fairly young river that's meandering through this valley. Meanders. A river flowing through a floodplain typically forms broad curves called meanders. Meanders form because the erosion is most rapid on the outside of a river. In time, the channel is deep in there. Swift currents send the water across the channel and downstream into the opposite bank. The process repeats itself, forming a series of meanders. This graphic illustrates how meanders form. The process on a meander bend, where there's less water on the inside, there's more friction and slower flowing water. And as I said, the deposition will normally occur on the inside. It's depicted here. Then on the outside, this is where you're going to get faster flowing water. And as I said, this is where the fish, the trout, are going to hang out on a trout stream in this deeper water, and typically it undercuts the bank here, so it provides a lot of cover for the fish to hang out. And typically on the outside curve 2 is the faster flowing water, which means the water has more oxygen, and the fish can breathe easier. Meanders change constantly. Meandering rivers change all the time. As a meander swings wider and wider, it becomes a loop that the river can break through. And you saw, this is the result. The term is headward erosion, and it breaks through. It causes what we call the oxbow lakes. The river usually breaks through during a flood, forming a cutoff. The river then deposits mud and silt at the ends of the abandoned meander. A curved body of water formed when the deposit separates the meander from its river is an oxbow lake. During a flood, the river carries large amounts of sediments and deposits them on the bank of the river, which forms natural levees. And here's a picture of an oxbow lake. You can see that it's cut off here from the source. And an oxbow lake will probably occur in this area. This will form an oxbow lake here, and probably again right up in here an oxbow lake will happen. Floods. Floods are naturally occurring events which temporarily relieve the water and sediment overload of a river channel. Most floods occur due to long-lasting rains, rapid melting of snows, or both. Small rivers with narrow floodplains can overflow after one heavy rain, creating a flash flood. Floods created by large rivers. Large rivers such as the Mississippi, Ohio, Missouri create floods after many days of steady rainfall over large parts of their vast drainage system. Also, floods occur in the springtime when the ground is still frozen, increasing runoff and snow thaws rapidly. Human activities in floods. Although most floods have natural causes, some human activities can worsen or even create floods. Such activities are, number 1, building dams for reservoirs. Number 2, urban development increases runoff. If you put in more blacktop, there's less ground to hold the water back. Removal of vegetation, and that's tied to urban development. Remove the trees and the grass, and the water's going to flow faster towards the river source. Agricultural activities and modification of the course of the river will all cause flooding. Here's a flood in Caracas, Venezuela. This flood occurred on December 1999, and it killed over 10,000 people. This is a flood in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, in June of 2008. I believe this is the Cedar River here, and it overflowed its bank, flooding back into Cedar Rapids. Flood prevention and control. People rely on many different measures to control and prevent floods. Each of these measures has its own advantages and disadvantages. One good way that people can lessen the impact of flooding is to restore natural flood protection that human activity has altered. If vegetation has been removed, replanting helps to control runoff. Dams are built to control floods, but in the long run they affect the natural balance of the river because they trap all the sediments. Without deposition, the erosion accelerates downstream, and this worsens floods. Dams severely alter the river ecosystems. Here's a flood control dam. I don't know which one that was. It does look like the Hoover Dam on Lake Mead. I'm not quite sure. Spillways. Spillways are channels that parallel the main course of a river. At critical points on the floodplain, the water is guided into the spillways and helps control the floods. On the lower Mississippi, there are numerous channels running parallel to the main river through the back swamps that then flow into the Gulf of Mexico. This graphic illustrates the Bonnet-Carr Spillway as the river, the Mississippi River, flows in this direction. In the flood events, it can channel that water alternatively in this direction into that bayou and prevent flooding of this area in here. This is an actual flood control plan. Again, here's that Bonnet-Carr Spillway. In the event of a big rain episode, the water can spill into Lake Pontchartrain. This concludes the end of the Section 4 lecture concludes all of the lectures. The online review for section 4 is posted in your My Big Campus account.